My mom said something. She goes, if I can get on the boat and not know if I would live because we needed a better life and we had to leave our country behind, you can open a company and start your own boat.
Hey folks, welcome. This is MK Palmore, CEO of Apogee Global RMS and the host of Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0. Today in the virtual studio, I have My-Ngoc Nguyen, who is an individual business owner in the cybersecurity and IT space. My-Ngoc and I came across one another through networking, largely LinkedIn. I think she's got an amazing story, and I'm looking forward to having a conversation with her about her journey as a business owner. Especially in these challenging economic times, but a business owner in the technology space, which I think has both the opportunity to grow, but also there are some challenges involved. And I think she'll have an excellent number of responses and likely conversational pieces that you guys will take interest in. So My-Ngoc, welcome to the virtual studio. It's nice to have you in.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, MK. I'm honored and excited to be on.
All right, outstanding. Let's get into it. And so in terms of the topic of leadership, what you've been seeing in the business environment, you have a consulting business. Maybe talk a little bit about what you feel like the state of play is right now as it relates to leadership in the corporate space.
I think in all walks of life, there are different types of leaders. And you can tell like there's certain types of leaders who kind of hold stead and have a vision to where things are. And then you have certain types of leaders that are very reactive to the current state of the environment like it is now. And they might bend to whatever seems to be popular. And so I see like a big trend on both sides, right? I've seen where there's corporations that they hold stead on certain aspects of what's happening now, while they're also trying to accommodate for the type of situation that we're in. The situation that we're in is the economy is not so great. And I have definitely seen there has been not only cuts in the government. So we do a lot of government contracts. I've dealt with a lot of individuals in the federal side of the house who are federal employees. They either got let go, have to take the fork of the road. They either took the fork of the road or was let go or got their salary cut. So there's leadership in that. I would say that there is a hold stead that needs to be done to make sure that morale of those that stay behind who just got their salary cut is maintained, right? Then there's the other side where there are other companies who are just cutting because they're also, it's not only affecting the federal government, it's affecting federal government contractors like myself and large government contractors. So to give you an example, we've been working with large firms like Leidos and SAIC, like all these various huge, larger government contractors, and they're laying off left and right. And being a large enterprise, I also see different leaders in those enterprises. Right. And there's some that hold very well and some that are very much kind of reactive to the environment, right? So the reactiveness to the environment sometimes have it where maybe they overcut or they may overcompensate certain things like that. I see is tough in the environment because it gets people into this level of anxiety, and anxiety didn't just build. And I believe as a leader, your job is to try to make sure that you address hurdles, try to speak the bigger picture, and actually point out and clearly remind everybody the vision and the mission that everyone's on, right? Also making them feel calm with the turmoil that's happening right now. So the trend that I see is that those that are leaders are in, I should say, leadership position. There are some that needs to still groom and sharpen their skill on certain components. And then I see that there are others who do a great job at being able to hold stead and understand the mission. So, I do a lot of still continuous growth on my side. And so there is an individual's name's Jim Collins. He wrote the book, Good to Great.
Good to Great, yeah.
Yeah, and he talked about being a level 5 leader. So, being a level 5 leader is having resolve and humbleness and being able to kind of stand aside, and yet being a level 5 leader also is about being able to like remind people of the mission and the vision, right? And then he also talks about a hedgehog concept where there's a hedgehog in the walk of life that we have, right? And there's the fox. And the fox, as I interpret reading his book, so fox is the one that's a visionary, that's a level 4 leader,
Mhm.
whereas a hedgehog is more of a level 5 leader, right? Able to kind of look at what's complex, what's in turmoil, all these various things, and be able to break it down to not only achieve the goals that we want, but to sustain and be able to look at, we'll be okay. We will fight through all these various things. And how do we get to a point where we can help somebody land somewhere else? Maybe it is something that our organization has to cut or reduce or whatever it is, but we are able to effectively help people depart, or we have to adjust accordingly, but in a professional way, not in any reactive
With
way.
grace. Yeah.
Yeah, with grace, right? And it's all about implementation. So an idea is great, and all these various things that's happening is fantastic in the sense of, oh, let's be more efficient. Everyone wants to be efficient, wants to cut costs, right? And I think those are great. It's just how we implement things, and that comes down to leadership, and then being that level 5 leader.
So you bring up a couple of questions. The first of which is it fair to say that it's more difficult to lead in challenging times than it is easy times? Or is that an
Of
overstatement?
course, I think so. Of course,
Yeah.
I think what differentiate a good leader from someone who needs to continue to grow in their leadership skills is being able to battle through difficult times.
Right.
Um, and I think that built it's also speaks about character. When we are in good times, it's easy, of
It's
course,
easy to do the right thing, right?
to do the right thing. It's when it's the tough times and we are challenged and we're put in a rock and a hard place and we have to go through certain things. That brings out the characteristics of a true individual. And if they really truly have that underlying leadership capabilities.
You think people are equipped for what's happening right now in the business world? Certainly, these economic challenges and the pressures that are being put both in the public and private sector, maybe they were foretold, but no one, I'm sure, could really envision exactly what the impact is going to be. As you stated, it's not just public sector entities that are reeling from a lot of the uncertainty that's going on. A lot of private sector entities that have connectivity to the global public sector are experiencing challenges, and that means the work environments right now are pressure filled. Sales teams can't make their quotas. Leaders are dealing in very complex areas where people feel like they're under a tremendous amount of pressure. There's a lot of uncertainty. Um, are we equipping leaders and people in management positions to be able to combat and survive in this kind of environment? Or
So,
are we throwing them out there without the tools that they need in order to be able to survive these kinds of things?
yeah, it's interesting that you asked that because I believe, I've heard different theories. Some people I've heard theories from that they believe that leadership is an innate part of your character. You can't train
Can't teach it.
or teach
Yeah,
leadership,
yeah,
right? I disagree with that. I think just like character, you can build character and you can
okay.
build leadership. And so when you said, and then it's an interesting question that you asked, like, are we giving them are we equipping these leaders with the necessary tool set? And I think that what is provided, we have a wealth of knowledge that's out there. And so they, as an individual leaders, have the capability to equip themselves. And so this is not new. The times that we're dealing with right now is not new. We've had recessions before. We had concerns about like the Great Depression, right? So we've
Right.
had these ups and downs in the economy. And in our current time, we are so fortunate that we are in a time where information and knowledge is at the tip of our fingers. Like the knowledge is out there
More so than ever before.
more
Correct.
so than ever before, and you can use and leverage like AI to like effectively even help you become more efficient, to like download, if I may say that, into your capabilities. And it really is, does a person have the ability to round themselves out with the appropriate diverse type of knowledge and information that's out there? And I think that's a problem too, is I try to check myself on this too. We do have confirmational biases. and that echo chamber that we have, especially now with algorithms just driving us a certain way, that it is on ourselves as leaders to go out there and make sure that we get diverse input, because we can so easily get one point of view driven to us. And so if we are not equipped, that's on us. That's on the leader itself.
Yeah. So you're a individual business owner. You've got your own shop, Secured IT Solutions. You stepped out on your own quite some time ago. I mean, you're a single stakeholder. I don't know if you answer to a board or if you have a group of advisors that you turn to. How hard is it for you as sort of the single voice or the single decision maker to ensure that every once in a while you take a step back, with, especially with maybe a challenging problem that you're facing, and gather input from other people? Is that easy or hard for you to do?
You know, I will tell you that it is a challenge. I challenge myself each time, right?
Yeah.
And so it's finding that balance, because having a having input from various people, at the end of the day, it comes down to me making that decision, right?
Right.
And yes, I have a lot of individuals who I don't have an advisory board, but I have peers, so that I do chat with them, I talk to them, I check on certain things, soundboard with them outside of my company. They're like other business owners, or I look for mentors who are in the larger firms, and I'd ask them certain things. And I think the balance is I do tend to step back and try to get that diverse input. I have to balance it out also to not always question myself too. So it's finding that stable component of who you are and having that confidence, but getting the correct input to make sure that you are making the information and being able to effectively take it in and make the right decisions that are diversified, right? So
Right.
it's a challenge. I challenge myself on both sides, like getting too much input or not getting enough, right? That's the balance. There's a book that I'm not sure if you've heard. It's called, and you might have heard already, it's from Adam Grant, called Think Again. And he talks about how there are people in lives, and in those roles that we are in lives, there's the scientist, there's a prosecutor, there's a politician, and there is, I think those are the three. There's one more. I thought there was four, but in those components, he showed studies that an individual, even as a leader,
Right.
business owner or business leader, those that actually are most effective is someone who can be a scientist, meaning you don't, so like a prosecutor is somebody who's like determined to like get their idea, they're right all the time, and they are off telling you why their thought process or whatever it is correct with all the evidence, right?
Right.
The politician's there to convince you that their idea is correct, right? They're always there and trying to get you all those things. Where a scientist looks at data and is willing to change based off of data.
Based on the information.
Yeah. And so he gave a lot of examples through the years of businesses and business leaders, and just do like a study of all the kind of various aspects of different companies and leaders. And he showed that those that can be a scientist are most effective, and how things that we've been thinking about through years. Like, for example, he showed in studies that, when it was told, like when you take a test, for example, and you circle the first answer, and then if you question it, don't just go with your gut and just keep on going, right?
Right.
He showed a high percentage, and I can't remember the percentage now, but a high percentage actually, if they questioned it and went back and changed their answer, they were actually more correct. So this old age thought that we had, like, oh no, go with your gut, it's probably correct and just go forward, is wrong, right?
Interesting. Yeah.
And that comes back to the whole component of being a scientist, have questions and having those various input, and being okay with changing your answer. And he even said, he's like, it is something that is of standard that business leaders must make quick and firm decisions. It's that whole firm decision that has like, it must be done, and I
Yeah.
can't
Gets us in trouble, right? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. And he said, if you're a scientist and you said, okay, here is my answer at this time, but be willing to change your answer when you get further input.
Yeah.
And so
I love that.
yeah. And so that was something that I read, and that's something that I try to work on. Because there's the old school me who gets pulled back and going, no, your word is your word. You said this.
Yeah.
It's your, you got to set the path, and that's where you're going. But can we set a path with a vision, knowing that the ways to get to the path may change,
Right.
right?
How
Yeah.
do you think about the topic of collaboration? As a small business, I assume you partner with other businesses to do and execute on projects. What do you look for in partners in terms of either characteristics? I'm sure you look for them to be successful in whatever it is that they do that complements your business, but like, what do you look for in the way of character from them?
So I'll tell you the biggest thing that we look at is their ability to work with us on simple things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let me just give you an example. The first thing that I kind of know if they're a, a partnering company. A partnering company, in my opinion, sees things mutually, no matter how big or small they are. And they will try to compromise.
Sees things mutually or sees a mutual benefit that they can identify. What,
Both, right?
okay.
And so what I mean by that is you want to be able to effectively work with somebody who can even though we're a small business and let's say they're a large business, they can still see value of us
Right.
and look for
Yeah.
mutual contribution, mutual stake, mutual. It's all mutual. It's not like
Yeah.
we're the big guys, we know better,
Two-way street. Yeah.
or it's not like, hey, we're two small companies and one is better than the other. And so one way I generally like, even just give you an example, is when they're the first conversation usually requires a mutual NDA. And so a way that I know if a company is really good about being mutual, and again, for me, that's a huge characteristic and that I see it from a partner. If they come back to me with an NDA and I do something very simple, I look at the governing law. From a governing law perspective, I'm based out of Las Vegas, Nevada. My lawyers are here. So if I was to want to enforce the NDA on my part, then it should come from a governing law in Las Vegas, Nevada, with the courts being here.
Right.
Whereas if they want to activate or bring suit to the NDA, then it will go to their governing law. Very simple change in the mutual NDA. And in the NDA, I always put in that if we do it, it's in the state of Nevada. If it's yours, we'll keep that governing
Yeah.
law that you have. If they kick it back right away and tell me, no, that is an area right there, that's this is not a mutual NDA.
Yeah. And interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is a huge characteristic that I look at.
So yeah, and you're looking immediately for some level of equanimity. In other words, balanced approach, both parties sort of seeing their value as not being the same, but being equal in the sense that I have an equal right to a positive outcome. You have an equal right to a positive outcome. And if we can align on that, then
That's
you could
correct.
probably solve almost anything.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing because when you partner, I mean, that's the whole word of partnership, right?
Right.
And that's a characteristic I look at is who is really willing to be good partners.
This may be an odd question for a business owner, but what's your ideal team setting? Small teams like fire teams, like 3 or 4 people, or do you like big teams where there's just scores of people engaged and maybe a ton of direct reports? I kind of know the answer to this, maybe based upon what your work scenario is, but what do you think's your sweet spot? What do you really like to see in the business world?
I think it does. It gets really difficult when you have a stronger, of course, as a business owner, I want to grow to
Mm-hmm.
get to that latter part that you're talking about. Large structure. I mean, you have to, as you need to support a bigger clientele, you have to have a bigger structure, you have to have
Yeah,
more,
you got to scale. Yeah,
you have to scale out.
yeah,
I would say it's harder to keep your culture. It's doable, right? It's hard to keep your culture when it is scaled out so much. And there are so many things that happens in a certain division when you get so large that it might be very difficult. So my preference is to kind of have that nice middle, not
yeah,
so small, sometimes so small when it's like a 4-3-4 team individual, you're doing everything and you
right.
don't get to strategize, you don't get to innovate. You're so busy like running that hamster wheel, just keeping the lights on.
Yeah.
So there's a happy balance between all that stuff, but we need to scale out. And of course, I would like to have it where it's large, but not too large that we lose touch of our culture and who we are from like what our values are and why we're here.
as a business owner, you must have thought to yourself that there is sort of an ideal space. I have a number in mind for my small business when I think about scaling and building out to a core competent team that can do all aspects of business operations and yet at the same time be able to handle large clients as well as small clients. Do you ever think about that, and what's that number look like for you?
I have not thought about that. I've thought about more of a target for revenue because
Okay.
my thoughts are with regards to that is we will make that as we scale, we'll scale right, and it will get to that point where we will adjust and we'll continue to adjust, and there is a revenue base that we are targeting
So
for.
I'm glad you're going in this direction because I'm going to push back on that a little bit.
Okay.
See, I think the challenge would be if revenue, obviously, the growth in revenue should be the goal of any business, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I my suspicion is those numbers will get away from you, especially if you're growing at a large clip where like you're bringing in year over year, 20-25% increase in revenue. I think there's a tendency to probably spend in areas where necessarily you may not need to spend. And I think the challenge for a business leader like yourself will be recognizing whenever that tipping point occurs so that you can kind of throttle back and say, hey, we've got enough here in terms of the core element to run this business, no matter how big the client happens to be. But I think that the more money you make, the less attention you begin to pay to stuff like that. Because sometimes that's a marker, right? The number of people in an enterprise is oftentimes a marker of success. Like you instead of having less than 50 people, you're running the shop with 150 people. So
Yeah.
that means something different in the market, right?
Absolutely. I totally hear you on that, saying like, there is that it is a marker, having a certain amount of
Yeah.
employees as a marker. I think for me, because I look at, and you're right, and that's a great like pushback for you to have me
Mhm.
think about all those things. Is for me, I always look at it from like, you try your best to definitely right scale it so that as you're going through it, you don't overly hire
Right.
and you spend too much in one area. But yeah, how do you not lose focus on those areas that continue to keep you growing and continue to be your base, right? um, and I think that is, I don't have a right answer for you because I'll tell you, I've seen companies, we've helped like one company, for example, when we started with them, they were less than 80 people. And
Yeah.
then over like the last 5 plus years, they've now gone close to over like 900 people.
Wow.
And so you kind of look at it, and I look and I see like, has their culture changed? Have they changed much? There's been a lot of changes in their environment, and I would say that, have they scaled out? Are they doing well? And it's hard to say because they've gone from a private to public and then back to private, right? And does it have, there's so many different factors. Does it have to do with more people, or is it different management, or is it just different because of the acquisitions and the type that's there? And so I would say it's very hard for me to kind of look at like where it is, right?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I key in on your response to this, and maybe want to dig a little deeper, is that you touched on something super important earlier around being able to not control the culture, but like that you want to be able to shape the culture yourself. And I think that at some number, that gets to be a whole lot more difficult, especially if you have a very clear and firm idea, unless you're playing a role or you have a very, very solid onboarding process. I think it's difficult to lose track of that. And for a culture to begin to evolve that maybe isn't the culture that you had originally envisioned, which, I could be completely naive about this. I think anything beyond, when you start to get beyond 50 people in a startup sort of a scenario in business, I believe you begin to lose track of that kind of thing. And as a boss, as a stakeholder, your stake in it becomes exponentially larger, and you begin to concentrate on different things
Right.
like meeting a higher bar, meeting a higher number, quota, whatever the case may be. And I just think it gets challenging for leaders beyond 50 or so people. So in my mind, Apogee, as it grows and scales, in my mind, hopefully will never be more than 50 people. But at the same time, I want to have the right mix of skills and people present so that I can be ensured to be able to handle the various size of clients that we would intend to handle. That's just, I don't know. Like, I could be naive. I could
No,
be absolutely wrong.
I
You
love.
and I might have a conversation 2 years from now. Like, I'm totally wrong. I'm hiring as many people as I can get.
Well, let me give you some flip side because what I like to do is I kind of look for examples, kind of like
Yeah,
a
yeah, yeah,
point of reference, right? So if I look at it and I think, let's look at the big, large companies like Apple. Have they
yeah.
lost their value? And I would say there's something about Apple and the reason why they've gotten so popular. And
They're a bit of an outlier, but I'll let you get away with that. Go ahead.
they're definitely an outlier, but it was done,
Yeah.
right? So
No, you're
I
absolutely right.
guess the thing is like it's still doable. So
Hmm.
that's what I mean by and then you look at Microsoft,
Yeah.
Gates, right? I mean, they are able to still carry forward. Now there are larger ones that maybe kind of lost clients or
Yeah, I mean, those folks are like, not only are they iconic individuals, right, who started these companies, but they're almost kind of forces of nature, right? There's not a ton of Bill Gates running around the
sure,
planet right now,
sure.
right? There was Steve Jobs was, I think, one of one. There might be people trying to imitate what they saw of him, but he was a fairly unique business leader on the landscape. I think more often than not, what you see, especially in some of these more mature companies, is people being given leadership roles, even the high level, chief operating officer, chief executive officer, mostly due to their network, and sort of contacts and experiences, and not necessarily their performance. I mean, how many examples do we have of CEOs that, quite honestly, failed multiple times over and still continue to get nods and opportunities to lead companies? I don't know. It just seems odd to me.
Sure. I guess I look for those point of reference, say, okay, that it's doable. And what can
Yeah,
you
no, no, yeah, and I don't want to interfere with your point.
yeah,
I'm
no,
just thinking myself. It's absolutely challenging, but continue on. It's absolutely doable. You are right,
yeah,
because we do have firm examples of it being done, and those cultures survive. And to your point, not only did they do it, but the culture survives beyond the person who created it.
that's right.
That's the real
That's the thing.
that's the real test.
That's the
Yeah,
real test. And I think that's a whole book. If you think about it, from good to great, right? That's actually
yeah,
a culture thing as well. I mean, Jim
right.
Collins's team researched great companies, and they saw those are certain leaders. But you're not wrong. There's others that
Yeah,
are bad as well. But on the flip side, I have seen where like we've helped many small businesses and startup companies as well that's grown. There was one where they were a rare earth company, and we were there to help them. They're no longer around, but it's funny. I just thought about them, but they're called Molly Corp, and they were like small. They had this, and I remember they called him a CTO, but that he was the technology innovator of the whole technology concept of how to get rare earth processed. He was the
okay,
main stakeholder. It was his kind of company. He just called himself CTO. It wasn't a
yeah,
technology company at all. It's a
interesting.
mining rare
Yeah,
earth process company. It's no longer around. But we were there to help them with their IT, cybersecurity, all that stuff. And I remember that company started out small, like probably like again, I think when we started, maybe less than 100. And then
hmm,
their stock prices went up like crazy, and they started hiring like crazy. I mean, I remember their stock. I was looking at this, talking about like maybe I should buy some stock because they're a client, and I'm seeing their stock prices like going from like $60 a share to like wow, now it's $70, and then it kept on raising, right?
yeah,
And you start seeing all these things, and then yeah, they I remember the gentleman, his name is Dr. Burba. I don't remember John Burba. And he was very super smart, had a vision. I don't know if he had a culture. And that was my thing is I don't know. Again, it goes back to what Jim Collins was talking about, right? Like I believe a leader, if they're humble and they have resolve, they have the ability to think about culture for the overarching. Where if you're a visionary, you're just looking at what you want, what's your idea, that vision, right? So Molly Corp, they had this vision, and he had great vision. Everything was fantastic, but then there was so much overspend that was starting to happen. They were really disorganized, and I
yeah.
didn't see a culture. It went from like it just went crazy. It went out of business, right? So at the end of the day, the mine that's there still,
Grew too much, overspent the whole. Yeah,
yeah. So it's just to your point, right? Another one that I just went through, helped a startup company, a great startup company. I don't want to name them because they're still existing.
yeah,
Um, and the CEO with a couple of like key individuals. That's why we were brought in. One of the key individuals who helped develop the platform, all this stuff. They had just really great ideas and they wanted to have a good culture. They spent a lot of time interviewing people, all these other stuff. And they went to their Series B. As soon as they went to Series Bs, of course, they had to inject additional like board members and new C levels. And I know that they interviewed like a new C level. They thought that he was aligned to them. They did so many interviews, like so many rounds. That new C level, that new CTO that came in didn't align to their culture. Ended up the CEO got booted off the board from the board, so he doesn't own it. And then the original people that were there, all gone.
Oh God.
And so the company is now ran by just new people. And they're probably in the round.
Yeah, that happens, right?
Happens, right? So to
Yeah,
your point, I hear you, right? And so I've been nervous also having a board. So when you go public, when you have a board, you relinquish a lot of control that could have it where you lose your company,
right.
unless you keep private and want to keep it under a certain number.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and keep private and keep the money out so that you can maintain control always. Maybe you take on some partners, but
Yeah.
keep those even in a limited fashion so that the ownership stake is always there. Yeah. No, I mean, there's pros and cons to both directions. I had a conversation with someone who I respect very much, who started his own business. It's in the sort of it's in what I would call the technology media space, which I'm not even sure existed when he started this business. Um, if I named him, people would certainly recognize the name. But I was having a conversation with him, and he's now been doing at this for 20 plus years. He's grown this into this immense brand. Great things are happening. And I asked him, you know, what is he, the usual, like what does he wish he knew, or what would he tell himself? The guy 20 years ago that started this enterprise, and he questions because he kept external money out. He basically, carried the thing out of his own pocket until it grew to something that could be. But he said that was hard, really, really hard. And looking back, he says he's not quite sure, but he thinks he should have taken money earlier and given up a little bit of ownership so that they could grow faster and scale faster than what they did. That just means there were some super lean years where it was just really hard and struggling, but he stayed at it, and he's thinking he wished he would have taken on some partners.
That's interesting. That I appreciate you sharing that because I've had that challenge. Uh,
Yeah,
so I founded this company in 2010, and I've kept everything's all self funded.
yeah,
There's been lean times. We've been
yeah,
working on some lean times, some great times, but I've kept money out. And I think if I've been able to inject more money, we would have been able to scale a lot faster
yeah,
and to the rate that I want. But I'm nervous because I've seen, again, unfortunately for me, sometimes I'm highly affected by points of reference. So you kind of know
yeah.
how I work, right?
I don't think that's a problem, especially if you recognize it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think for me, I've seen multiple times where companies have lost the individuals lost ownership of their company
lost it. Yeah,
just from that. And I know it says like, well, you're just inserting a little, but a little sometimes
that's how it
grows
starts.
and
Yeah.
it's how it starts, right?
So as a female in the space, in the IT space, probably not shocking to you that there's not a ton of female CEOs and leaders in the technology space. You seem to have done well. Has that been a challenge for you? Do you see on the landscape that, I don't know, people putting obstacles in your way, either explicitly or implicitly, because you're a woman leader in the space?
Yeah. I think so. I think it happens in multiple realms, right?
Hmm.
I think one, just society wise, is just how it
Yeah,
is
yeah,
society wise.
right.
I think it's just some when you're in a industry it's very male dominant, people don't maybe consciously have a level of preference, I should say, but it happens that way, right? To this judgment that comes along right away as a female,
Mhm.
right? So if you don't have a masculine kind of persona, you're soft, and I embrace my feminine attributes, right?
Yeah,
Don't try to hide it because I can carry myself intellectually, experience wise, and that is through growth through the years because there's a lot of individuals who question it when they see you. they question your ability to even have that level of intellect or even that level of experience or capabilities. So that is just innate, I think, just from a society perspective. I think also it's unfortunate, and I would say this: sometimes women are harsh on women, and I think that's a very hard thing. I know for me, there is a certain standard that we want to have because we want to make sure that we support each other and we all support each other. But if
Yeah.
that individual where that standard's not there, I think females can be very harsh with each other as well. So
Yeah.
it's not only males, I think it's also females. And I think from a society wise, that's just kind of something that we've had just roots of it. And it's difficult. And I would just tell you, being a business owner, I've seen this too. I am a certified woman owned small business,
Mhm.
and so I know part of my certification, I have to show that I fully run the business, I fully manage the business,
Majority ownership. Yeah.
I own ownership. But I'm fully managing it, right? They want
Hmm.
to know that I manage it. They want to see my resume to make sure that I can actually execute on all these things, right? So
Yeah.
I look at this, I'm like, gosh, I've gone through so much. And then when I had to go through my certification, they have to also ask me, and this is part of the AA, well, why do you think it's a disadvantage, right? So it's been tough to go through all these things. On the flip side, I've seen other women-owned businesses where all those questions I've been questioned, I question if those companies been questioned the same way,
Yeah.
because the female, as much as they're smart, is not the key talent or does not have the talent skill and is somewhat a figurehead with
Oh,
where it
interesting.
was like a
Yeah.
husband and wife kind of dynamic, and the husband is really like, let's say, the engineer or the talent, and then they want to have a woman owned business, so then they put
Yeah.
her in front. So that those are things that are really true, that actually adds on to the difficulties of the industry as well.
Right. Um, are you optimistic that that things are changing? Are they changing for the better, or do you feel it's been stagnant over, say, the last decade?
With the current times, I think it's gone back.
Gone back a little bit.
And I'll tell you just an example. With the whole DEI initiative, there was about over 66% of women owned contracts
Yeah.
that were cut because they were considered women owned contracts.
I think that gets. I think that part of the DEI discussion gets actually lost in a lot of the rhetoric that's thrown about. That, I mean, it's quite clear the data has shown that actually the biggest benefactors of that kind of policy implementation are actually women-owned businesses rather than, you tick a couple of boxes. You're not only a woman, you're a minority woman owner as well. There's some that don't, but women, as a general observation, I think have benefited most from those policies, and the fact that they're walking them back. We'll see um, women-owned businesses largely impacted, probably more so than most businesses, in terms of rolling back these policies and opportunities for business. And the other thing that I think gets lost in that conversation is that, while there is a identification of some particular factor that gets you in the lane to compete, you still have to deliver
Right.
on the business, right? You still have to deliver the service
Yeah.
as designed and identified. And to your point, very early in the conversation about bias, like it basically is just putting a check and balance against that bias that would normally be in place. That where you would go in and just select a given entity that kind of looks the way you expect them to look from a leadership standpoint and give them the job. At the end of the day, you're still expecting the same high quality delivered results. And no one, I don't think we talk enough about that being a component of all of this, right? It's that doesn't get left by the wayside.
Right. And so I see what's happening in current times is actually taking us back. I think there was
Yeah.
progression and people were
Mm.
seeing it. I think as a nation, there was progress. And I think altogether, and I don't know, it's just a nation, but I think other countries as well, because you look at
Yeah.
worldwide, there is a step back. And I'm not sure what's going on with it, but it isn't getting better. It was.
And yeah, and I don't think anyone knows what the outcome is going to be of the current climate, um, which for all of us means that things like leading in difficulty business owners, whether you're a business owner or whether or not you're a corporate leader, these are difficult times, and I think leaders are learning a lot about themselves in this environment, because you're being asked as a leader really to tap into portions of your discipline that maybe you haven't had to tap into before.
Well, and I think one of the I've had the honor and I should say ability, luxury, privilege, whatever you want to say. I think it's privilege and honor to talk to like two really good leaders during this whole last 3 4 months.
Yeah.
One, he was a government leader, and he highlighted to me, especially like with talking about with Doge and everything, how it's so big. Like even though they didn't know certain things, they still needed to communicate. So that kind of highlighted to me how important communication is. And I think that's a huge thing. And I will tell you that's a struggle for me.
Hmm.
Even being where I'm so busy, it's a small company, having like so much communication and just making sure that there's communication to everybody. I think that's very tough, right? So I think it's just so important for us to make sure that we have the right communication at the right time to the right folks. And I continue to work on that. That's something that I would say I haven't perfected. I continue to work on that. Especially when you add more people, going back to your scaling, right? When you add more people, I'm like, well, how much? I don't have time to meet with everybody.
Right.
And I give it to a certain leader and they don't give them the right information. And I can have like this one all hands meeting, but some people don't go to all hands meeting. Some people are very tainted with that as well. But
Hmm.
at least you're out there, right? So that is one thing that I saw with regard to this that was big. It just even if you don't know, communicate that you don't know, and that
Right.
this is what you're doing in the meantime, or this is what you see from the past based off of what you do know, right? Um, Another leader I know, he works at a big, large firm, big, large government contractor. Right? I mentioned it; they everyone would know
Yeah.
when DEI got cut and he's in charge of all this component, there was a lot that they had from a program perspective that they had to change because one, not only did they have to shut down their program, otherwise they'll lose contracts. Two, they had to make sure that they put in processes because anyone could be, people were encouraged to be a whistleblower. So the whole
Right.
tear
Yeah.
down of the DEI was not only was there a whistleblower component, but you were incentivized to be a whistleblower. And this whistleblower could take millions, hundred of millions to $1 billion contracts away from this client, right? So this leader had to go in and really, again, balance it out. Look at what they had. So, like certain things, like for example, they were recruiting for like STEM, women in STEM, like science, technology, engineering, and math. They can't have that anymore. That's cut all those programs down. No more focused stuff, right? Or if it was minority in STEM, or they had, I think they had one where it was like they were supporting, I think, a group called Black Girls Coding. Like they
Yeah.
had to cut all of those down, and it would be like all of these things. It was demoralizing for people who were working those projects. But he had to go out and just say, well, how can we make this so that, yeah, it's not specialized anymore, but we could just open it up, right? And still kind of talk through it. But it's
Yeah.
hard times, and it goes back to communication.
Yeah. I think I might have to do a whole series on communication. I've come to believe that the ability to communicate is likely, I call it the MVP of leadership characteristics. I think it's I really do believe it's sort of that critical piece that without it, you certainly can't expect to go from good to great. And you also may not even get to be good without like really excellent communication skills. And I put a lot of pressure on myself as a leader. Like I sometimes I feel like even I'm not, and I believe I'm a pretty decent communicator. Like sometimes I'm like, man, you got to start communicating more. And now that I've started up this consultancy, like, am I communicating enough with the people who are working for me? We have our syncs, our team syncs, and all that kind of stuff. But guess what? Maybe I need to set up individual cadences and make sure that I'm, shepherding everybody along, but it's just like this pressure that you should I think put on yourself around communication, because without it, as you touched on in one of your answers as we were talking here, people it basically chaos ensues. If you're even if you don't know, say I don't know, but here's what I do know. I've seen so many instances of leaders just being silent when there are challenging times afoot, and they don't know what to say about it, so they don't say anything. And guess what? People just run amok with all kinds of crazy ideas. And it's pretty unsettling for teams, especially at the lower levels. I try and explain to other leaders that if you think you're unsettled as a leader, imagine how someone is who is living paycheck to paycheck working for that same organization and they don't know any information either. Like that's it literally it's exponentially downwardly impacting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think also it's kind of not just like communication, but it's also there are a level of touch points that people need from an interpersonal
Yeah.
relationship
Yeah.
perspective that is needed. So that's the challenge that I have. It's not just it's like I said, it's not only the right communication, but it's also the right amount because
Now.
people
Yeah.
need to that. Unfortunately, as a small business, we really need to focus on the people. And I say it's unfortunate because I say that if you have bad people, your company can have a downturn too.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
You can't hide bad people in a small business.
right? It can come
Yeah.
out. But you could hire someone accidentally
Yeah.
as a bad hire, right? And then it immediately comes out. But then also there are good employees who become bad because of stresses in life, all these various things. So how do you keep those good people so that they don't go down to the bad slope? It's also the right points of communication too.
So, I think I'm going to have to add you to my personal board of advisors and make the ask of you because I love these conversations with you, and I think that
Wow,
you are
touch.
you're deeply experienced, and I think your perspective is super interesting. What's one or two tidbits you want to leave folks with just on the topic maybe of running a small business or the topic of leadership?
Oh gosh.
Or should I ask you what should you have told yourself 12 years ago or 10 years ago when you started your business? What do you wish you knew?
What I wish I knew. I wish I knew that I would be okay. That I would make it. I would make it fine. Yeah,
Has it taken away some stress?
it would have taken away some stress. It was
Yeah,
very tough for me to go out my own. I did not want to do this. I was when you're getting paid, you're executive, you're
yeah,
making a good amount, getting bonuses, stable. And I brought up bonuses because I'm like, when bonuses come, I get to spend that bonus. As a
right.
company, when your bonus comes, you don't spend that money, right? And I did
It goes back into the
it goes back into the company so it can grow, right?
yeah,
And I did not want to lose that. The only reason I went and I did it, there was multiple factors. One of the huge factors, I couldn't stay with the current employer that I was with, and I wanted bigger and greater things.
yeah.
And I was talking to my mom, and I'm a daughter of a Vietnamese um, refugees, right? So and I am careful using the word refugees because my parents are very sensitive. They say
Mhm.
they're not immigrants. They didn't voluntarily come in. They were kicked out of their country. They had no choice but to leave their country.
Yeah.
So my mom said something. She goes, if I can get on the boat and not know if I would live because we needed a better life and we had to leave our country behind, you can open a company and start your own boat and go to
Wow.
see where that goes. So I guess that to answer your question, if that was, that would have relieved some of my angst.
Yeah.
It'll be okay.
That's
Mom's right.
powerful.
Yeah.
That's powerful. I think we should leave it there. I love that
Yeah.
as an answer. And kudos to your mom for laying that out for you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Meetup, I really enjoyed this conversation.
Same here.
And as I indicated, I look forward to future conversations with you. Not all of them will be recorded.
Yeah. I did too.
But
Great. I learned so much from you, and you've gotten me thinking on certain things that I had to go
yeah.
back and go.
Well, I appreciate the combo. I appreciate you stepping in the studio here on Amplify, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. And for those of you listening, I hope that you got some nuggets out of this as normal, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to Amplified, the Leadership Student 2.0 podcast. If you're ready to elevate your personal leadership and drive your team's success, connect with Apogee Global RMS for custom coaching and development solutions. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode of impactful personal leadership strategies. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and empowering those around you. Together, we'll amplify your success